The moment he stopped watching her, his enemies came for her. Elena demanded freedom, and for the first time in his life, Alessandro obeyed. No guards, no surveillance, no men in shadows. But his restraint became her danger. On a crowded Florence street, a black car rolled beside her. A stranger grabbed her arm, and Alessandro's enemies finally saw the opening they had waited for. She had ignored his protection, only to learn why the cage had existed. Picture this scene with me, you and I looking closely at the shadows. The camera drifts across a dark bedroom, where moonlight slices like a cold blade across the silk sheets. Elena lies perfectly still, pinned beneath the heavy arm of a man she thought was her safe harbor. The silence feels absolute until the fatal blow finally lands. Deep in his sleep, his fingers trace her hair, and his lips murmur one agonizing word. Valentina, her own sister. The name drips with a dark obsession that shatters the room instantly. She does not scream or fight back. She simply stares at the wall while her life burns to ash. It brings us to a hard, simple truth we all must face eventually. The deepest, most fatal wounds we endure never spill a single drop of blood. They just quietly dismantle your soul in perfect silence. For 3 long years, she played the flawless understudy in her own tragedy. 3 years drifting through the chilling orbit of a man who demanded total control, begging for just a scrap of validation. Yet, with one sleepy breath, Alessandro erased it all. She was never his prize, only a warm substitute for a ghost he could never catch. Watch her face in the pale light as sheer horror gives way to pure survival. She slips from his grip with the terrifying precision of a hostage escaping a captor. Her bare feet meet the freezing marble floor of a room that is no longer a sanctuary, but a gilded tomb. We all eventually learn a vital lesson when pushed to the edge. Walking away is rarely an act of weak surrender. It is simply the highest form of protecting the only heart you have left. The sharp lighting catches the dark ink crawling up his neck, bold declarations of a dominance she had tried to ignore. His heavy arm drops onto the pillow where her head rested moments before. These tattoos are the permanent branding of a soul that feeds on absolute ownership. Lost in her delusion, she utilized these vanity marks, forcing herself to find comfort in the arms of a tyrant. But tonight, that illusion is dead. She dresses in the suffocating shadows, her movements rigid and hollow. We must recognize a hard truth about our own hearts. It is tragically easy to mistake a beautifully crafted cage for genuine devotion. She abandons the lavish closet filled with dresses he bought to erase her spirit, quietly reclaiming her shattered identity in the dark instead. Let us look at this together. The camera lingers on diamonds, resting on velvet trays, stones worth more than her childhood home. They are glittering evidence of his methodical erasure of her soul. She leaves every expensive shackle untouched. Instead, she reaches for a battered leather purse, holding nothing but her original identification and a desperate stash of cash. Her deep instincts always knew this tragedy would demand an escape. Pausing at the wooden door, she casts one final glance at the sleeping kingpin. Stripped of his conscious cruelty, Alessandro looks deceptively peaceful, his harsh features masked in innocence. But we must never forget this brutal lesson. The serene face a monster wears in his dreams will never wash away the waking ruin he leaves behind in the daylight. The echo of that whispered name plays on a relentless loop in her mind. Valentina, the golden sister who danced with death, this devil 3 years ago, and found the strength to walk away. Elena had wandered blindly into the wreckage 6 months later, surrendering her heart to a man who used her to fill an agonizing void. she finally turns her back on the false warmth of the bed. The grand hallway is swallowed by darkness, lined with stolen art and thick shadows. Armed guards patrol the perimeter, but years of quiet terror have taught her their rhythm. There is a simple truth for anyone feeling trapped. Pay close attention to the dark corners of your world. She glides through his blind spots like a phantom, fading into the gardens toward the east gate. The heavy iron of the east gate yields to a desolate road. The freezing night air strikes her pale face, yet her eyes remain totally dry. The camera holds tight on her expression here, capturing the chilling numbness of profound shock. The agonizing grief of loving a phantom will inevitably tear her apart by dawn, but for now, the simple mechanics of walking keep her breathing. She disappears beyond the compound cameras. We cut back to the master bedroom, where the cruel kingpin finally stirs from his haunted slumber. He blindly reaches across the mattress, expecting to claim his prized possession, only to find an empty expanse of cold silk. Remember this simple truth about pain. True peace in this fragile life is born the very second we abandon the hopeless task of trying to warm a frozen heart. Harsh morning light violently pierces the room, forcing him to squint. He calls her name, but the heavy silence answers back with a deafening wait. The untouchable kingpin shoots upright, bracing his arms against the mattress as cold dread floods his veins. The sprawling suite feels like a hollow tomb. No running water, no trace of her sweet perfume. A sharp spike of pure panic strikes his chest. You and I have seen this tragic flaw before. A man desperate for absolute control always crumbles the moment his captive defies him. He violently rips through the closet and tears apart the bathroom. The old leather purse is gone, yet the expensive perfume and the silver-framed lie of their romance sit entirely untouched. His beautiful captive has vanished into thin air. Pay close attention to the framing here, because witnessing a tyrant's mind fracture is totally fascinating. He snatches his phone from the nightstand. Nothing. The quiet anchor to his sanity has dissolved. He summons his lieutenant Marco, desperately slipping the cold mask of a boss back over his terrified face. "Where is she?" he demands, the venom barely hiding his panic. Marco trembles, confessing she vanished through the gates at 4 a.m. The very concept of abandonment shatters his arrogant reality. He breathes in slow, ragged draws, the dark ink twisting as his jaw locks in bitter denial. She could not leave, not her. The tragic lesson of power is always the same in life. Absolute control is merely a desperate illusion designed to mask our deepest, most paralyzing fears. In the twisted theater of his mind, she was merely an artifact brought to fill the gaping void in his ruined soul. "Find her," he commands. The dark threat in his voice hangs heavy in the air. When Marco hesitates, the kingpin lowers his tone into a predatory hum. "I said find her now." Left alone in the sprawling bedroom, the absolute silence begins to scream, exposing the pathetic depths of his isolation. His hands curl into fists, stretching the violent ink across his knuckles. The camera tightens as he violently rewinds his memories of the night before. They were close. The moment felt tender, almost real. It teaches us a haunting truth about human arrogance. A person who believes they see everything will remain utterly blind, while the one beside them quietly engineers an escape. We often watch men of hubris burn their kingdoms down. His subconscious had brutally betrayed his invincible facade. He thought he fell asleep whispering Elena's name, but a dark memory surfaces. The phone rings, shattering the quiet. Marco reports she boarded a train bound for Florence. That name drops like a depth charge. Florence is the epicenter of his psychological ruin, the sanctuary of her sister Valentina. Hearing that cursed city flips a violent switch in his psyche. The vivid dream floods his vision, the haunting smile, the desperate reach for the woman who destroyed him. His blood turns to ice. Here is the hard truth about denial. You can lie to everyone around you, but your buried secrets will always betray you. The horrific realization lands. He spoke the phantom's name aloud. The poetic irony of his undoing crashes over him. She lay awake in the dark, forced to listen to his desperate confession of obsession for her own flesh and blood. The gravity of his betrayal strikes with such force that his massive frame staggers. Marco's panicked voice buzzes through the receiver, begging to drag her off the train. No, Alessandro rasps. The phone slips from his hand. For 3 years, he bled this devoted woman dry, using her loyalty as a shield against his madness. One whispered syllable reduced his empire to ashes. He stares at his reflection, seeing only a hollow man dressed as a king. It leaves us with a bitter life lesson. We inevitably destroy the truest things in our lives when we absolutely refuse to heal our own inner brokenness. Look closely with me. The camera focuses on his forearms, marked with the Italian word for family, a tragic plea from a boy left to the streets. He built a brutal empire to ensure he never lost control, only to dismantle it in his sleep. We cut to Elena, sitting like a marble statue in a sunlit train. In car, she stares at the rolling countryside, her reflection hovering in the glass. Shock has encased her broken heart in ice, refusing to let a tear fall. The phone vibrates against the seat. 17 missed calls. His name lights up the screen, begging for the one thing she will never surrender to him again, her absolute attention. The lesson here is clear. True power is not the violent ability to hold someone captive, but the quiet strength to finally walk away. You and I are going to unpack this story together because we have probably all danced with that dangerous, razor-thin edge of a toxic romance. Alessandro's frantic voicemails stack up on her phone, sounding less like a feared syndicate boss and more like a broken tyrant. His texts plead for her return, completely ignoring the emotional crime scene he left behind. The cinematic irony here is suffocating. It begs her to come home, but that sprawling mansion was never a sanctuary. To grasp this tragedy, we have to rewind to a lavish gala in Milan. Elena locks eyes with this wounded man, entirely unaware that her older sister, Valentina, had just shattered his heart 6 months prior. Elena thinks she is saving a lost soul, but she is really just watering the seeds of her own destruction. This fatal flaw ultimately sealed Elena's fate. She stared at the predator lurking beneath his immaculate Italian suit and completely missed the fangs. She failed to register the violent, coiled discipline in his posture. Instead, she looked at a cold killer and saw a broken bird needing a gentle hand. It is the ultimate rescue fantasy, and it destroyed her. The camera cuts to the blistering Florence train station. The merciless sun beats down as Elena steps onto the concrete, clutching one pathetic bag. There is no master plan. She runs on raw adrenaline, driven by a biological need to escape the monster. She is crawling back to the exact place her trauma began. The lesson here is brutal, but undeniable. You can never heal a broken soul by bleeding on it. Let us look at this piece by piece, shall we? When Elena finally made her escape, there was only one person in Florence she could turn to, the exact woman who unknowingly set this nightmare in motion. Imagine the lighting shifting as Valentina opens her heavy door, finding her sister shivering in the hallway like a lost ghost. Elena asks for a place to stay, a question carrying the crushing weight of 20 years of toxic sibling rivalry. The older sister always took what she desired, leaving the younger to survive on scraps. You can see the heavy guilt flash across Valentina's pale face. But here is a truth we all learn eventually. Family ties are the hardest chains to break. She slowly steps aside, letting the living embodiment of her deepest sins walk right into her pristine home. You have to appreciate the visual storytelling here. Valentina's apartment mirrors her soul, expensive, modern, and completely dead inside. Picture stark white walls, cold art, and massive windows overlooking the dark Arno River. It is a chic, emotionally barren cage. Valentina asks what happened, her voice tight with dread. Elena drops her bag onto the leather couch and delivers the fatal blow. He said, "Your name." The psychological bomb detonates. Valentina freezes. Elena's voice splinters, exposing the raw agony of a shattered heart. She confesses that Alessandro was asleep, whispering Valentina's name like a desperate prayer in the dark. The crushing silence teaches us a harsh reality. Sometimes the truth does not set you free. It just burns the house to the ground. Valentina looks like a marble statue by the window. The fading light highlights the toes she shares with her sister, though she wears them behind iron armor. Elena sounds hollow as the confession pours out. 3 years of her youth, wasted. She genuinely believed this ruthless man was over her sister. Instead, she was playing the tragic understudy, a mere stand-in for his true obsession. Valentina can barely choke out an apology, but notice the subtle shift in her expression. For the first time, Elena spots something she has never witnessed in her tough older sister, pure terror. The life lesson here is simple: no dark secret stays buried forever. Elena finally forces the inevitable question. What really happened? Elena demands us to know why Valentina walked away from such power. The older sister turns her back, wrapping arms around her ribs, trying to hold her collapsing world together. She brushes the past off as merely complicated, but Elena fires back, her tone sharp as glass. After 3 years of bleeding as an unwitting pawn, she has earned the right line of complicated. Then, the impenetrable older sister finally snaps, confessing the agonizing truth. She never left him. He forced her out. The ruthless boss banished her because enemies were closing in, and she was his fatal weakness. He looked her dead in the eyes and lied, claiming he never loved her, to keep her breathing. We often accept the lies that hurt us most, simply because the absolute truth is far too heavy to carry alone. Stick with me. This is where the tragic irony cuts deepest. Valentina admits she ran, spending months hating him and years trying to scrape his memory from her mind. When she heard he was dating Elena, she was consumed by a violent jealousy. It convinced her that he truly did not care for her. Elena stands frozen, violently replaying the last 3 years, his impenetrable emotional walls, the rigid rules, the sudden flashes of deep guilt in his dark eyes. It was all a carefully staged performance. She was nothing but a living shield for the woman he actually loved. The suffocation of that absolute betrayal is crushing. Life teaches us that silence is often the cruelest weapon of all. Elena's voice finally shatters as she asks why her own flesh and blood never tried to warn her. Valentina throws up her thick emotional defenses. What was she supposed to say? Do not fall for him, because my criminal ex might still be obsessed with me. She lets out a dark, hollow laugh. She tells Elena she could not bear to ruin things because, for the first time since their mother died, Elena looked happy. But Elena refuses the excuse. She realizes her life was built on shifting sand. She screams at her sister, the raw sound tearing through the pristine apartment. He whispered your name in the dark. Is that the behavior of a man who has moved on? Valentina has no defense against that agonizing logic. The simple lesson is that avoiding the ugly truth only magnifies the eventual destruction. They are locked in a brutal standoff, haunted by the exact same ghost. 3 years of toxic secrets hang heavy in the air, slowly choking them both. Finally, Valentina asks what the plan is. Elena stares down at her trembling hands. She left every flawless diamond, every gold band, and every trace of his wealth behind. She is physically free, but quietly admits she has no idea how to survive next. That act, whispered confession, is more agonizing than the betrayal itself. Without the monster pulling her strings, she no longer knows her own purpose. True freedom is terrifying when a golden cage is all you know. Meanwhile, it takes Alessandro's crew exactly 2 days to locate her, but he does not kick the door down. Instead, he just watches. He demands a constant feed of her movements, guarding her from the shadows like a cursed guardian angel. You and I are going to watch this untouchable kingpin completely fall apart. Surveillance reports flow in constantly. Elena is living off bare basics, sipping cheap coffee near the bridge. Entirely isolated, Alessandro sits in his cavernous, dark study, surrounded by a vast criminal empire. Yet none of it means a thing without her. His right-hand man, Marco, watches his boss physically disintegrate. Alessandro has not slept in days. His voice is a raw rasp when he admits he needs her back. Marco tells him to just go take her. When has the boss ever asked for permission? But here is the profound lesson. Real love always requires the absolute surrender of control. The monster is finally waking up to the horrible reality of the psychological damage he has inflicted. Picture this terrifying syndicate boss, standing frozen by his window, staring out at the vibrant gardens Elena planted. Every blooming rose was her desperately trying to breathe life into his world. Yet he refuses to just go take her. Why? Because the crushing weight of reality has finally hit him. He destroyed an innocent woman just to protect the fading memory of another. He fed her perfectly constructed lies. He whispers into the empty room that she deserves better than his violence. Marco is rendered utterly speechless. In 15 years of brutal bloodshed, he has never once heard his boss consider what a victim deserves. True remorse changes the very shape of a man. The wolf is no longer hunting. He is standing in the dark, mourning the light he extinguished. It is not a simple breakup for Alessandro. It is full-blown, debilitating grief. 2 agonizing weeks drag by. Back in Florence, Elena is trapped in a grey, repetitive loop. Morning coffee, an afternoon walk, suffocating evenings with her sister, dodging the unspoken trauma between them. They are parallel lines, permanently scarred by the same man. But Elena is no fool. 3 years with a paranoid kingpin taught her how to spot a tail. She catches subtle reflections in bakery windows. She notices the men reading newspapers who never turn the page. She knows his ghosts are tracking her every single move, driving her slowly insane. The lesson is undeniable. You can never truly heal from a deep wound when the blood-stained knife is still hovering right over you. Let us pause and really look at the dark gears turning inside. Let us step back and look at the quiet tragedy of this moment. Elena asks her sister what to do, her voice reduced to a fragile whisper. Valentina just stares out at the black water. Why advise Elena to speak to him? Because Valentina lives the exact waking nightmare her sister wants to avoid. She accepted her exile without demanding the truth, spending every day fighting phantom arguments in her head. She warns Elena that nobody heals until they look the source of their trauma right in the eye. Elena fires back, terrified the manipulator will just deal her more lies. But here is a brutal life lesson we cannot ignore. Closure is just a polite word we use for sifting through the wreckage of our own hearts. Elena studies the dark sky, wondering if she possesses the courage to face him. 15 days. That is exactly the time it takes for a criminal titan to break. The sunlight in the cafe is harsh, bleaching the pavement where Elena sits. Suddenly, a violent screech of metal against concrete shatters the quiet. She flinches, and there he is, the man who usually wears untouchable power like a tailored suit is now drowning in his own clothes. Heavy shadows pool under his exhausted eyes, his cheekbones sharp enough to draw blood. He rasps her name like a man swallowing dry sand. She does not blink, her voice freezing the air as she tells him they are entirely done. You and I have probably learned this the hard way, but there is a profound truth here. The ultimate power you can ever hold over your captor is the quiet, terrifying strength to simply walk away. Look closely at the visual framing here. You can feel the physical agony radiating from his skin. Alessandro swallows hard, his throat tight with grief. He admits he knows she blocked his number, his voice reduced to a beggar's rasp, desperate to explain. Elena sits rigid as stone. Her tone remains dead and flat as she demands to know why their entire romance was a fabricated ghost story. The untouchable crime lord then plays his final, bleeding card. He tells her he loves her. She searches his dark eyes for the familiar poison, finding only an empty vessel. Softly, she whispers that he only loves a phantom. The hardest lesson a person can learn is this. You can never fix a ruined man by offering him your own beating heart. You must leave to save yourself. The visual contrast in this scene is poetry. We watch an apex predator crumbling in the bright Florence sunlight. Tourists laugh nearby, blind to the tragedy unfolding at the corner table. Alessandro claims he sent his former lover away to protect her from his violent life. Elena strikes his fatal nerve, accusing him of using her warm body as a cheap replacement. Watch the mob boss actually flinch. His tattooed fingers curl into fists against the marble as he bleeds out the truth. He confesses that when he first saw her, he thought a dead woman had returned. He sits there exposed, admitting he used her to bandage his rotting soul. Hear me clearly on this simple lesson. Never let anyone use your bright light to patch the dark holes they dug for themselves. Watch how the predator pivots. He spins his poisonous obsession, swearing a cruel game blossomed into real, breathing love. His voice shatters on the words. Is it the calculated move of a sociopath, or the genuine agony of a man waking up to his sins? He calls himself a coward, begging for pity. The tragic hook is that Elena almost surrenders. Her trauma bond screams at her to soothe the monster who ruined her, but a raw survival instinct bites back. She reminds him of that dark night when he held her tight and whispered another woman's name. Alessandro scrambles, blaming the haunting nightmares of his violent past. The silence that follows is louder than a gunshot. The lesson here is vital. When a person shows you their true darkness, do not try to paint them in a false, forgiving light. The poisoned air between them is thick enough to choke the scene. Alessandro plays the wounded victim, swearing he always knew whose skin he was touching. He claims 2 weeks without her have ground his soul to dust. Pay close attention to his hands here. He reaches across the marble, forcing his fingers to stop exactly 1 inch away from hers. It mimics respect, but do not be fooled. It is a masterful manipulation, silently begging her to close the gap. He drops his ultimate declaration of love. Elena stares at his scarred knuckles, paralyzed by the irony. This brutal man who dictated her existence now wears the mask of total powerlessness. Remember this harsh truth. A true manipulator will will always weaponize their own tears to keep you securely chained. The camera lingers on the mob boss, washed in harsh daylight, wearing the perfect mask of a broken man. It is a terrifying display of control. Elena fights the silent war of her life just to stand up, weakly breathing that she needs time. Pause the film right there. A microscopic flash of relief dances in his dark eyes. He knows his hook is still buried deep. Elena confesses she no longer recognizes her own face. She has existed inside his suffocating shadow. For so long, she fears the original Elena is gone. Alessandro vows to wait for forever. The sheer weight of that dark promise makes her chest physically ache. She demands he call off his guard dogs. The vital life lesson here is stark. You can never rediscover yourself while hiding in the shadow of the person who actively erased you. Stick with me, because this is where the psychology gets fascinating. Let us examine what happens when a bird tests an open cage. Elena drops her final demand, warning him that love requires room to breathe. She vanishes into the crowd, refusing to look back. Yet her nervous system remains wired for violence. She physically feels his stare tracking her spine. The tragic twist is that Alessandro actually obeys. He pulls his invisible army off the streets. It takes Elena 3 paranoid days to accept the ghosts have faded. The men in dark suits are gone. The black sedans idling by her door have vanished. There is no trace of his suffocating watch. The harsh life lesson is plain. A true abuser does not just lock away your physical body, they build a permanent, invisible prison inside your mind. This is the bitterest act of our tragedy. When the invisible chains hit the floor, Elena should be dancing in the sunlight. Instead, the camera captures her in an emotional freefall. The sudden silence does not taste like liberation, it tastes like terrifying abandonment. She loathes herself for craving his shadow, but that is the twisted genius of extreme manipulation. Stripping away his control leaves her drifting in zero gravity. When a friend notes the mobsters are gone, Elena cannot force a smile. She merely haunts the cobblestone streets like a displaced spirit, and she traces old steps, hunting for the innocent girl she was before he burned her world to ash. The lesson here is brutal. Walking out of the cell is easy, but tearing the iron bars out of your own mind is the labor of a lifetime. We are about to uncover what happens when she tries to start over. The devastating truth is that the original Elena is dead. 36 months of bending her spine to soothe, a monster has rewired her instincts. She spent 3 years as a polished mirror for his ego, and a mirror left in the dark reflects nothing. Just as she takes a shaky breath of independence, reality crashes the scene. She is walking a quiet path when a heavy black sedan violently cuts off her escape. The window glides down, revealing an unfamiliar face with a hollow smile, radiating pure psychopathic intent. He politely asks for her time. Instantly, the dormant survival sirens in her blood begin screaming. The life lesson is terrifying. Merely escaping your personal monster does not magically make the dark woods safe. We open on a sequence framed as pure terror. Elena sprints for her life, but the black sedan glides alongside her like a shadow. The stranger sheds his polite disguise, plunging her into a waking nightmare. She scrambles towards a sunlit plaza, hoping the mass of ordinary people might become her armor. Just as she thinks she is safe, a massive hand clamps down on her shoulder, pressing hard enough to snap bone. These men do not want her dead. They want the dark secrets of the syndicate she left behind. In this exact frame, her fragile delusion crumbles to dust. She honestly thought walking away from the underworld would keep her safe. It brings us to a harsh, unavoidable lesson about life. Sometimes, The freedom you sacrifice everything to win can simply paint a new target on your back for much hungrier predators. Notice the tragic bravery in her posture. Even it is entirely futile. Elena tries to build armor out of her heartbreak, telling the operative that she and the crime boss are ancient history. He just offers a chilling smirk, pointing out that her lack of a terrifying protector is exactly why they are taking her. She frantically scans the bustling Italian square, crashing into a cold reality. People are actively turning their faces away. The public remains blind to her panic. She spent 3 years isolated inside a violent glass castle. Now she is drowning in a sea of normal citizens, and the wolves are closing in. It offers an incredibly bitter lesson about human nature. When the worst storms of your life finally hit, the vast majority of people will just quietly look the other way to save themselves. You and I need to unpack the cruelty of this sequence together. The operative weaponizes the cowardice of the crowd, using their silence to drag her away. Elena does the math. She cannot break a killer's hold, and screaming to blank faces is useless. But just as the fire leaves her eyes, a single, suppressed gunshot drops the attacker onto the cobblestone. The getaway driver hits the gas, abandoning the hunt. Elena stands frozen in the ringing aftermath, completely numb. Then, from the shadows of an alley, Marco steps into the light. Her former lover's most loyal enforcer grabs her arm with a terribly familiar, gentle grip. It points to a deeply uncomfortable truth about life. Sometimes, the very monster you try to escape is the only real shield you have left in the world. Marco's frame blocks out the streetlights as he forces Elena into a getaway car, offering no debate. She vibrates with terror, struck by a bitter irony. Alessandro promised to stop tracking her, yet here is his top soldier. The engine revs as Marco drops a heavy piece of reality. The boss did pull his eyes away, but his men refuse to let her walk into danger. Elena demands to know why they still care. Marco admits that the crew protects the boss's obsession, even against his direct orders. Staring at her shaking hands, the cruelest joke settles into her bones. Her only armor is the very crime family she fought to escape. It is a harsh lesson we all must remember. Breaking out of your cage never guarantees you are prepared for the starving wolves waiting outside. The car pulls into a fortified villa where the mob boss's absence feels deafening. Silent guards treat her with the reverence of a tragic queen. Marco drops a heavy bombshell. He swears she is free to walk out the door, but warns her to stay put until they eliminate the cartel men hunting her. When she asks why, Marco is brutally honest. Rival families saw her independence as a bleeding wound to exploit against Alessandro. Elena's knees give out, collapsing onto the leather sofa like a broken doll. The tragic irony hangs thick in the room. She fought a desperate war for her freedom, only to lock herself inside another gilded prison just to survive the night. It reminds us of a very simple truth. True independence is often a dangerous luxury, and walking away always carries a heavy price. Let us look at this piece by piece, shall we? In her desperate attempt to find herself, Elena became a pawn in a war against the phantom she fled. Her voice is a hollow whisper when she asks if Alessandro knows what happened. Marco hesitates. That heartbeat of silence exposes the boss' shattered mind. Marco confesses his men had to physically intercept the kingpin on a tarmac, wrestling him back by reminding him of the boundary Elena drew. For a man wired to dominate, staying anchored instead of rushing to save her is a monumental psychological fracture. Elena closes her eyes against the tears. It reveals a wild paradox of the human heart. For a deeply violent man, staying away when his soul screams to protect you, is the purest form of love he can offer. For a boss whose empire rests on control, staying paralyzed while she is hunted must feel like being torn apart. Elena chokes down her terror, her voice cracking as she tells Marco to thank him for staying away. That fragile whisper highlights their deep trauma bond, rewarding the monster simply for keeping his claws sheathed. For 4 agonizing days, Marco manages her gilded cage with cold precision, detached from the emotional storm ripping through his boss. On the final evening, Marco delivers the news. The threat is eliminated. His icy silence paints the room with the unseen blood of a massive body count. It leaves us staring at an uncomfortable reality about healing. Physically, walking away from a toxic person is the easy part. Breaking the mental chains they leave behind is the true battle. Stick with me here, because the psychology is fascinating. 3 years suffocating under a narcissist trained Elena to swallow her words. When living in a cage, the best survival tactic is pretending the bars do not exist. But in the quiet safe house, her mind keeps panning back to the broken look in Alessandro's eyes. The tragedy is staggering. He silenced his watchdogs against every predatory instinct just because she asked for space. He stood in the shadows while wolves hunted her, suppressing his nature to honor her boundaries. He is trying to rip out his own toxic wiring to prove he can change. It is an aching lesson about sacrifice. Sometimes, the most hardened souls will completely shatter their own rigid rules for the one person they simply cannot endure losing. The tension begs a question: would this tortured restraint hold? By day 5 in isolation, Elena shatters, quietly asking to see him. Pure relief washes over Marco S.'s face as he makes the call. The storm arrives before you even see it. The screech of tires on gravel, the thud of a door, the frantic footsteps across stone. Elena stands paralyzed, her heart battering her ribs like a trapped bird. When Alessandro breaches the doorway, he looks like a hollow ghost. His suit hangs off a starved frame, his jaw shadowed by rough stubble. But the second his dark eyes lock onto her trembling form, that terrifying, aggressive hunger roars back to life. It unveils a brutal truth. A toxic obsession never just destroys the innocent victim. It completely devours the monster from the inside out. The moment her name tears from his throat, it strikes Elena like a blow, resurrecting every trauma bond she tried to bury. They remain anchored on opposite sides of the room, the air suffocating with grief. He asks if she is hurt, his tone terrifyingly hollow. When she whispers that his guards reached her in time, his jaw locks tight enough to shatter bone. It is the agonizing portrait of a control freak realizing his utter helplessness. His voice cracks, confessing how he lost his mind, paralyzed by the fear of losing her to the wolves. He aggressively hoards all the blame for the attack. It highlights a twisted psychological defense. The villain will greedily claim all the devastating guilt, simply to maintain the tragic illusion that he is still the one pulling every string. He lists his failures until Elena snaps, ordering him to shut his mouth. Astonishingly, the violent mob boss falls dead silent. Taking her order is a mind-bending shift in power. Elena closes the distance, staring into the tragic hope on his face. She maps out why their love is doomed, terrified of being a replacement for a ghost. But the dark magic of Stockholm Syndrome has already won. She breaks down, confessing she cannot fake her independence anymore. He is the only thing haunting her mind. She violently throws his emotional abuse back at him, and he flinches as if a bullet ripped through his chest. It forces a bitter realization upon us. An attachment forged in the fires of absolute terror will always leave a permanent, ugly scar on your soul, no matter how far you run. We are about to uncover what happens when the dust settles. She refuses to pull punches, detailing the psychological hell he created, yet she spirals back into the gravity of their trauma bond. She confesses that while his enemies dragged her away, she was not focused on the cold gun, but consumed by the echoes of their last fight. She throws a desperate lifeline, offering to build something honest from the ashes. Hearing this, the untouchable crime boss loses his composure. His hand visibly shakes as he reaches out, grazing her cheek. He promises to bleed out every Mafia secret, handing her the exact ammunition she could use to destroy him. It leaves us with a chilling reality. When an apex predator rolls over to expose his throat, it is often just the ultimate manipulation to make you stay. He offers to tear away his mask, risking her disgust, to expose the broken monster underneath. He traces her cheekbones so gently, you would never guess those same hands have ended lives. When she asks her worth, his defenses vanish. He swears she means more than his blood-soaked empire and dark family legacy, mapping out how he will burn his syndicate to ashes just to keep her safe. But before he finishes painting his ruin, she leans in and crashes her lips against his. The careful dialogue shatters into a raw collision of two desperate souls. Logic simply cannot survive a direct hit from human craving. The simple truth is that our deepest desires will always overpower our strongest, most carefully built walls. Stick with me, because this is where the tragic poetry peaks. The second her lips meet his, he crushes her against his chest, like a dying man finding water. When they pull apart, he begs her to come home. It sounds soft, but it is a heavy command disguised as a plea. Elena turns to ice. She tells him she needs space to discover who she is outside of his suffocating shadow. When he demands a timeline, she flatly refuses. You and I can clearly see the brutal war raging behind his eyes. Every predatory instinct screams at him to drag her back by force. But in the end, his hands just drop to his sides. It teaches us a difficult truth. The most terrifying form of real power is knowing exactly when to let go of the things you want to control the most. Let us hit pause and watch this shift unfold. In a massive twist, our mobster folds to her demands. He agrees to give her space, but refuses to pull his guards, blaming rival wolves. Instead of fighting the cage, Elena flips the script. She demands to manage her own security detail, seizing Troll. He nods, laying down one desperate condition. He must hear her voice every single day, to trust that she is still breathing. This twisted trade of power finally silences the constant panic she has carried since her escape. They agree to try this fragile dance for 30 days. The hard lesson here is strange but deeply true. Sometimes the monster that shattered your world is the exact person you must negotiate with to survive. True healing often requires a highly uncomfortable compromise. Let us look at this tragedy together, frame by frame. The camera isolates Elena in a quiet apartment, but the oppressive shadow of his voice on the phone bridges the miles. They strip away the small talk, uncovering the dark rot buried in his mind. Alessandro spills the truth about Valentina, his voice sounding dead. He foolishly cast her as a hardened queen in his violent theater, only to watch a cartel put a gun to her head. Now, he masks his colossal guilt behind a thick facade of ice. His enemies only sought to erase her to crack his godlike pride. These crime lords do not mourn a woman as a broken heart. They mourn the loss as a simple scratch on their crown. The sobering lesson is clear. You must never tie your soul to a man who only loves you as a reflection of his own dark glory. The tragedy of his grand design unfolds in slow motion. To spare Valentina from a bullet, he intentionally crushed her spirit. He became a monster, so his enemies would lose their power over him. Yet, breaking her completely fractured his own sanity. The frame shifts, and Elena walks into his ruins like a living ghost of the woman he destroyed. He tries to convince himself she is just a prop to block out his roaring trauma, but as the camera lingers on his trembling hands, the truth sets in. Elena is no longer just a stand-in. She has carved out an agonizing space in his dark mind. It highlights a painful human flaw. We build towering fortresses of lies to stay safe, only to find they keep us trapped in the dark, terrified of the blinding light of a real second chance. Elena backs him into a corner, forcing him to face the endless nightmare loop of his violent past. The lighting is harsh, exposing his suffocating guilt. He deliberately poisoned the mind of a woman he loved, leaving a toxic stain on his soul he could never wash away. But the mind is a fickle director. He wakes in a cold sweat now because he dreams only of Elena. He sees the curve of her face and feels the pure agony of her walking out the door. Seeing his heavy armor finally crack, Elena realizes her own emotional bleeding has slowed. 2 months after her escape, she returns to Rome, but strategically signs a lease for her own apartment. The lesson is crucial. True independence is the only real shield you have when dealing with a predator. You must always keep one foot out the door to survive. You and I need to watch how this dark narrative completely flips. Our lethal boss actually starts bowing to her boundaries. He only crosses the threshold of her apartment when invited, backing into the shadows the second she needs room to breathe. Picture the wide cinematic shot. He walks beside her through sunlit, crowded streets. No armored cars, no armed guards. He is rewiring his violent instinct to dominate, stepping painfully into her quiet world. Down by the river, she notes how much he despises this exposure. He whispers that being in the open feels like a loaded gun to the head, yet keeping her makes it worth it. That is the brutal truth about real human growth. It demands we step out from behind our safe, bulletproof glass and stand completely exposed in the line of fire. The heavy ink across his hands remains a visceral reminder that this man is a literal killer, but the camera catches Elena looking at those tattoos with a softer focus. They stop flashing like warning sirens and become a tragic history she is digesting. Then she forces a brutal collision. She drags him to a sit-down with Valentina, determined to clear the wreckage. The second they share the same oxygen, Valentina is in panic. Alessandro stands rigid as a guard dog, his hand glued to Elena's spine, radiating lethal energy even in a plain shirt. But Elena calmly commands the room, owning the trap she just set. The hard truth is unavoidable for all of us. Staring directly into the eyes of your worst memories is the only way to strip away their radioactive power over your future. The tension in the room is thick enough to choke on. Alessandro finally drops the mask and shreds his false narrative. The moment he confesses that he shattered Valentina's soul solely to keep her breathing, she breaks down. The camera holds on her face as years of bitter anger wash away in tears. She voices a deepest wound, the agonizing belief she was never enough for him. Surprisingly, Alessandro does not deflect. He names his own cowardice, admitting he ruined her to spare his ego from watching her die. When she asks why he ever hunted Elena, his answer lands like a physical blow. He says she just looked like her. The life lesson here is freezing cold. A true narcissist will forever seek out a reflection, completely blind to the actual human being standing right behind the glass. Stick with me, because you and I must examine this agonizing wreckage. We often tragically confuse the sudden relief from pain with actual love. Elena is profoundly trauma-bonded to the phantom who stole her freedom. Across the table, Valentina stares at the exact monster who broke her, yet she actively defends him. She looks into Elena's eyes, swearing he truly loves her, pointing out the hungry gaze he never once bestowed upon her. Valentina flashes a haunting trauma smile. She declares herself healed, while reducing her entire life to a mere stepping stone in their twisted romance. It is a devastating portrait of emotional collateral damage. But this is the dark truth of human endurance. We will completely rewrite our own tragic history just to survive the crushing weight of the present day. Valentina exhales a trembling breath and actually hands over her blessing. She tells Elena she is thrilled. She found a man who treats her like the center of the universe. The irony is painful. He does not see a universe, only his own dark reflection. Desperate for a normal family, Elena reaches across the table to stitch their broken sisterhood back together. But the story takes a chilling pivot. That very same night, Alessandro drives his favorite obsession right back behind his high fortress walls. Dragging a victim back to the exact garden where she was held captive is a terrifying, quiet display of absolute power. It exposes our most fatal human flaw. We constantly walk right back into the very cages that broke us, tragically mistaking the familiar cold iron bars for a place of safety. The camera glides through the shadows as he delivers a masterclass in manipulation. Alessandro swears he preserved the estate exactly as she left it. Spinning his unhinged obsession into a romantic gesture, he whispers that changing a single room would feel like erasing her soul. But this is pure ego. He freezes the environment to maintain absolute control over the memory. Elena drifts through the moonlit garden, touching the petals, admitting she actually felt joy here, even while suffocating under his thumb. This mental collision is Stockholm Syndrome painted in cinematic light. He watches her like a wolf dressed in a tailored suit. It leaves us with a stark, brutal truth. The violent hand that shatters you into a million pieces can never genuinely be the hand that heals you. Let us look closely at this moment together. Elena appears shattered, whispering that her mind is falling apart. He steps in, securing his hands around her waist. It looks like a lover's embrace, but that iron grip is a declaration of total ownership. He promises she has all the time in the world, spinning a beautiful illusion of free will. Yet, the second she asks if she can ever truly leave, his jaw locks tight enough to crack bone. His rigid posture screams the truth his soft voice tries to hide. He uses his past cruelty as twisted proof of his growth, dumping the weight of his redemption onto her shoulders. It is a harsh reality to face. Real change always starts from the inside out. You can never force a broken soul to carry the heavy, jagged pieces of your own dark heart. The lighting shifts, casting shadows as the steel trap finally snaps shut. He whispers she is the only thing he hungers for, and she pulls him down to meet her lips. Do not mistake this cinematic shot for genuine affection. This is a physical surrender, fueled purely by survival. She looks up and sees a tortured man in love, but we are watching a cold predator securing his prize. Grasping for control, she draws a line. She demands her own space and swears she will walk away if he tells one more lie. He agrees instantly, without hesitation. She searches his dark eyes for deceit and finds nothing but a chilling emptiness. A dangerous man always believes his own fictions the moment he speaks them. Never confuse a beautifully sculpted mask for an honest human face. He pulls her hard against his chest, his heart hammering against his ribs. The swelling score might trick your ears, but that is not the racing pulse of a romantic leading man. It is the raw adrenaline of a hunter who has finally cornered his exhausted prey. He buries his face in her hair, anchoring her in the exact garden where he first shattered her reality. The weeks that follow drift into the honeymoon phase of the cycle of violence. It is a choreographed performance. Elena claims a wing of the massive estate, decorating to desperately hold onto some fragment of her fading identity. She keeps her city lease as a quiet backup plan, but the tragic lesson here is clear. Safety nets are completely useless if you have already handed your mind over to the man holding the ropes. Let us look at this frame together. Notice how he carefully stages his restraint. The camera lingers on the heavy space between them. He only eats across the mahogany table when asked, and only enters her bedroom upon invitation. The room is silent except for the ticking clock of his patience. It mimics the gentle rhythm of respect perfectly. It shatters the heart to watch her hopeful eyes tracking this crime boss as he pretends to kneel at her feet. She falls for the illusion of his iron discipline, blind to the fact that a chained wolf is still a wolf. The agonizing truth is how desperately we want to believe a beautiful lie. Just because the hand stops striking does not mean your soul is safe. Restraint is never the same as redemption. 3 months bleed away in this mirage, and Elena begins to trust the soft focus of this fake peace. Then he drags her into the harsh flashbulbs of a high society gala. Do not let the sparkling chandeliers fool you. This is a masterclass in ruthless public relations. Her escape attempt months ago cracked his iron reputation, whispering rumors of weakness to his rivals. To fix it, he drapes her in midnight blue silk and anchors her securely to his side. Under the glittering lights, she is no queen. She is an exquisite prop, painted perfectly to prove the dictator still holds his crown. It is a bitter pill, but life demands we learn this simple rule. When a toxic man places you on a towering pedestal, he is usually just doing it to catch the better lighting for himself. Watch the deliberate way he moves through this crowded ballroom. His dark gaze tracks her every movement like a suffocating spotlight. The moment a stranger's eyes linger, his hand slides to the bare base of her spine. It is a silent, terrifying claim of ownership. Tonight, he plays the perfect gentleman in a high collar and thick gloves, burying the violent ink that maps out his sins. And Elena? She is so lost in the tragic fog of her captivity that her heart actually bleeds for his discomfort. She reaches out, her fingers grazing his covered hand, whispering that he never has to hide his scars from her. We have all danced to this tragic melody, have we not? We eagerly drink the exact venom we should run from, praying our fragile love is strong enough to filter the poison out. You and I need to pause the reel right here and examine this emotional collapse. She stares up at a monster and softly praises his sharpest teeth. For a predator, this is absolute victory. A faked shadow of vulnerability crosses his face as he pulls her onto the polished dance floor. They sway together on sheer muscle memory, caught in the tragic rhythm of their cycle. He pulls her flush against his chest, his breathing unnervingly calm, and murmurs that he has a question for her. You can practically hear her breath catch. He seamlessly rewrites the bloodiest chapters of their past, painting his cruel betrayal as a noble sacrifice. The deepest tragedy of human nature is that we will gladly burn our own reality to the ground just to keep the hands that are slowly crushing us. The noise of the gala fades as his voice drops into a hypnotic register. From his pocket emerges a velvet box. Inside rests a heavy diamond choked by sapphires. It catches the light perfectly, but do not be deceived. It is nothing more than a beautiful anchor designed to weigh her down. He manipulates the scene. his eyes brimming with manufactured sorrow as he swears he does not deserve her soul. He vows he cherishes her far more than his violent empire. For a man built on blood, control is his only oxygen. Making this a devastating lie, he is politely handing her a life sentence. It is agonizing to witness because the lesson cuts deep. A romantic promise from a man who breaks your spirit is never a vow of devotion. It is simply an upgrade to your security clearance inside his cage. Watch the tragic gears turning behind her heavy eyes. 3 years ago, she saw the terrifying emptiness in his soul. But today, her spirit is so bruised she genuinely believes her affection has cured his rotting heart. When the breathless yes slips from her trembling lips, the heavy door of her fate slams shut. Immediately, the tension leaves his jaw, melting into a warm, rewarding smile for his obedient prize. The camera zooms in as he slides that freezing platinum band onto her finger. He is publicly branding his masterpiece, while the blurred crowd murmurs in the background. The cruelest lesson of survival is that if you wait in the pitch black for too long, you eventually forget what the sun looks like. You just sit quietly and start polishing the iron bars of your own cell. Stick with me here, because from this moment on, her reality is written by his unseen hand. The wedding is rushed through in weeks, carrying the frantic tempo of a thief securing stolen art before alarms sound. The visual irony of the setting is a gut punch. He stands her at the altar in the exact garden where she was once his prisoner. She glows in fragile white silk while he absorbs the sunlight in bottomless black. His violent tattoos crawl up his neck because she begged him to be vulnerable. She has wrapped a romantic ribbon around the blade, destined to make her bleed. He swears to protect her in a trembling voice. Protect her from what? He is the ghost haunting the house. The darkest truth is that we are always the most hopelessly blind when staring directly into the light of our own desires. Chokes out her vows through heavy tears, promising to hold a candle to his darkest corners. Alessandro consumes her in a breathless kiss, pulling the life from her lungs. But let the camera pull back. Beyond these stone walls, the city is bleeding. A rival syndicate is racking their shotguns, demanding blood for his past massacres. By dawn, his exhausted lieutenant is begging him to abort the lavish honeymoon before the bodies start dropping. Does the gentle groom care? Not a single bit. Watch the soft dye in his eyes as his expression hardens into cold gray granite. The romantic leading man is already dead. Life always teaches us the same brutal lesson in the end. No matter how perfectly painted the human mask is, the beast underneath will always wake up starving for blood. Alessandro is running on a lethal dose of absolute arrogance. He twists the impending gang war into a dark fairy tale, painting his violence as a shield for his bride. The camera catches his thumb running over that bright platinum band. It is no symbol of devotion. It is a legally binding receipt of purchase. He casually orders his soldiers to delay the slaughter until he returns, sentencing dissenters to a shallow grave. The scene then cuts to the sunlit cliffs of the Amalfi Coast. Elena leans against the balcony, mistaking this beautiful isolation for genuine freedom. When his heavy arms slide around her waist from the shadows, it is not a lover finding his mate. The warning is terrifyingly clear. Sometimes the tightest embrace belongs to the warden, carefully measuring the walls of his new cage. He buries his face in her neck, asking in a low murmur where her thoughts have drifted. Her whispered response lands like a devastating blow. She admits her darkest fear is no longer his crushing grip, but the terrifying idea of running away and never finding her way back. She looks at this cold-blooded killer, utterly blind to the ice in his veins. Trembling fingers trace the jagged ink on his throat, convincing herself his brutality is just heavy armor worn to keep her alive. She murmurs that she loves him, the ultimate reflex of a broken spirit. When all your power is stripped away, the human heart desperately learns to worship the very hand gripping the knife. He presses his forehead against hers, pulling them both deeper into the dark water. The second that heavy oak door clicks shut, the trap is flawlessly sealed. What unfolds is a sunlit montage of the perfect honeymoon. But watch the ticking clock, because this illusion survives exactly 3 days. For 72 golden hours, Alessandro directs a breathtaking performance. Elena wakes to crashing tides and the warmth of his hands. They sip wine on private terraces, playing simple lovers, untouched by blood. It is terrifying to watch how effortlessly he wears this disguise. The tension leaves his spine. He stops scanning corners for snipers and even smiles at her laughter. But you and I must remember this bitter truth about toxic souls. A fleeting pause in the nightmare never means the monster is cured. It is only the devil taking a brief weekend away from the slaughter. The grip tightens when he lets her pull him through tourist markets, buying cheap souvenirs like an ordinary man. The human costume fits perfectly. By the third midnight, they are tangled under a starry sky, and Elena softly begs him to let them vanish into this quiet life forever. Look closely at his reaction. He launches into a theatrical vow, promising to burn his criminal empire to ash just to see her smile. The pale moonlight catches that dark ink on his throat. He sounds so sincerely desperate that it makes your blood run cold. But always remember this vital lesson about dangerous attachments. When a man built on absolute ruin swears you are his entire world, he is not choosing peace. He is simply installing you as the fragile, beating heart of his endless war zone. The camera lingers, shadows cutting across his jaw as he stares directly into her eyes. He swears his empire, and millions mean nothing without her. But watch her body language. Elena is physically crumbling under the weight of his confession. He is taking his fractured sanity and dropping it squarely on her shoulders. She wants to believe this fantasy, but reality refuses to fade. She remembers those dark nights he whispered her dead sister's name in his sleep. She is just a ghost haunting her own marriage, a backup plan dressed in expensive silk. It is a suffocating truth. You can never truly love away someone else's ghosts, no matter how hard you try. Unable to heal his broken soul, she simply begs to go back inside, trading a brutal emotional truth for the quiet safety of 4 plain walls. Pause the frame right here. We are watching the exact second a fairy tale burns to ash. The illusion shatters the moment his phone rings. Look closely at his face in the dim light. His jaw locks tight, and the devoted husband is instantly swallowed by an apex predator. Elena sits perfectly still, watching him process this violent shift. Notice how his humanity flatlines as he answers. The color drains from his skin, his voice dropping into a dead register of pure calculation. He demands a body count and orders total silence for 6 hours. When he hangs up and turns back to her, Elena is staring at a stranger. The human mask has slipped off entirely. It is a chilling reminder of a hard truth. Sometimes, the most dangerous monsters in our lives are the ones we willingly invite into our own homes. The room suddenly shrinks into a concrete cell. The man she loved is gone, replaced by the ruthless crime boss she spent 3 years surviving. He tells her, with zero warmth in his eyes, that the Benedetti family hit his facility and left 12 men dead. The true horror is the tale he saves for last. They left her name written in blood on the warehouse wall. Imagine the floor dropping out from under Elena. The rival syndicate is actively trying to trigger a mental collapse in Alessandro. They understand his twisted pathology. They know Elena is his ultimate obsession and greatest vulnerability. They are betting his ego will shatter the second his prized possession is threatened. His heavy hands suddenly grab her face. It hurts to admit, but sometimes being someone's entire world just makes you a walking target. Focus on his hands in this frame. His thumbs press brutally hard into her cheekbones. He promises to burn the rival organization to ash and hunt down every soul involved, swearing his emotions will not force a tactical mistake. But the real tragedy of this scene is not his cold vow of mass murder. It is Elena's quiet reaction. She actually believes him. Her trauma bond is so deep that his promise to slaughter dozens of people gives her a twisted sense of peace. They evacuate to Rome before the sun breaches the horizon. By the time they arrive, the sprawling estate is a fortified compound swarming with armed guards. As those heavy steel gates lock shut with a deafening clang, Elena feels the suffocating weight of her cage. True freedom is a state of mind, and she just willingly handed over the keys. Alessandro paces the room, trying to reframe her strict captivity as loving protection. He swears nothing can breach his walls without his consent. But you and I both know the truth. The human mind cannot easily tell the difference between a safe fortress and a locked prison. Down in his private study, the air is thick with paranoia. Marco is hunched over a massive desk, buried in tactical maps. This dark room perfectly reflects the true state of Alessandro's mind, a web of violence spreading like a disease. Marco looks up, delivering the worst kind of news. The Benedetti group has vanished entirely underground. This radio silence is terrifying because it means they are preparing a catastrophic strike. Silence is always the lauwarmsting sign of all, if you just know how to listen. Under the harsh lights, Marco theorizes the bloody message was designed to trigger Alessandro's violent impulses. Right on cue, Alessandro gives a textbook display of narcissistic control. He squeezes Elena's hand, a painful physical reminder that he owns her, and declares he will deny his enemies that satisfaction. His word is absolute law. They will project total invulnerability, and his wife will not step outside. When Elena stiffens, demanding a say in her own lockdown, the men stare at her in dead silence. Alessandro coldly explains she is nothing but a target meant to hurt him, so she needs to be locked away in a safe. The tension spikes the second she calls him out for making her a prisoner. You cannot cage a human being and expect them to be grateful for the heavy lock on the door. Hit pause and watch his eyes. You can catch a tiny flicker of genuine hurt before his cold, sociopathic detachment swallows it whole. He insists these rules are just his way of keeping her breathing. Now, watch Elena's brilliant counterattack. She softens her voice, playing the pacifying captive. Right before dropping her demands, she refuses to go back to being the invisible, obedient victim she played for 3 years. Instead, she demands a seat at his war table. She reminds him she has spent years watching him operate, quietly absorbing the brutal mechanics of his empire. She stares straight into the pitch-black eyes of a killer and refuses to be boxed up like a fragile antique while a war burns outside. If you truly want to survive the wolves, you eventually have to learn how to bite back. He looks her up and down, dissecting her mind like a surgeon. You and I know exactly what he is doing in this silent beat. He is hunting for a crack in her armor, trying to force her back into submission, but all he finds is a wall of steel. His jaw clenches, and he orders Marco to give her full security clearance. Marco looks visibly sick over the command, proving how poisoned their world is with toxic traditions. Still, he obeys. Alessandro lays down the reality. She remains trapped on the estate, but gets total access to the war room. This is not real freedom. It is just a slightly bigger cage, an illusion of an equal partnership. But for Elena, standing her ground against a monster is a huge victory. Small wins keep you alive when the entire game is rigged against you. Let us look closely at how trauma actually reshapes a person. Over the next few days, you and I watch Elena spiral into an obsession that completely buries who she used to be. She memorizes bloody territory, lines, and tracks the shifting loyalties of dangerous men just to make sense of the dark. Through this cold mechanics, she discovers their faceless enemy is already rotting from the inside. The legendary boss, Enzo Benedetti, is dying of terminal cancer. This forces his young son, Luca, into the big chair way before he is ready. Luca is sweating with a massive inferiority complex, driven by a frantic need to prove he is a ruthless man before his terrifying father takes his last breath. Remember this well. A desperate man with something to prove is always the most dangerous wild card on the board. The camera captures shadows stretching across the map room as Elena nails the rival heir's true motivation. She realizes Luca does not care about expanding territory or stacking money. He is sick with a burning need to make history, wanting to be the boss who destroyed the Vitali Empire. Marco quietly agrees, noting the warehouse slaughter was pure theater to grab their attention. But look at how completely Elena has been swallowed by this twisted world. Without missing a beat, she looks at her husband and orders a preemptive strike. She is literally begging a psychopath to commit murder. It reveals a terrifying truth about human nature. If you spend enough time fighting in the dark, your own eyes eventually forget what the light looks like. The target becomes Giulia Benedetti, a woman who has nothing to do with the mob violence. Yet Luca clings to her as his one remaining shred of sanity. Even Marco, a hardened killer, is rattled by the idea of dragging an innocent civilian into the crossfire. But Elena drops a chilling pivot. She suggests they simply invite Giulia over for a visit, launching a surgical strike on Luca's greatest vulnerability. By casually threatening his sister, she will force Luca into a paranoid meltdown, ensuring he makes a fatal mistake just to protect his blood. Alessandro actually laughs out loud, deeply thrilled by her sudden cruelty. Always remember that the deepest wounds are never made with cold steel, but with the people we love. Watching Alessandro react to this dark suggestion is truly unsettling. We see the rare sight of a massive narcissist thrilled to find someone operating on his brutal level. He is delighted his wife just outsmarted the deadly predators in the room. Marco rigidly agrees to set up a public meeting with Giulia, but then reality crashes down. You can see the cold panic wash over Elena's face when she realizes she must execute this trap herself. Alessandro calmly backs her play, noting a woman will easily bypass their enemy's security. Yet his possessive paranoia flares back up immediately. He steps in close, gripping her waist tight to remind her who she belongs to. Control is just a desperate illusion when you hand your heart to someone else. The camera lingers on Elena, capturing the moment she flips his protective instincts entirely against him. She sheds the role of a helpless liability, stepping into the bloody light as an active player. Notice the subtle tilt of her chin as she demands to be his strength. For the first time, Alessandro's face softens as he admits his blindness. What follows are 3 agonizing days of conditioning. Marco relentlessly drills her on crisis protocols, forcing her to rehearse every disaster until her natural instincts are suppressed. You and I need to recognize this trap. This is how survival disguises itself as love. True affection should never require body armor just to make it through the night. The night before she walks into the fire, Alessandro is completely unraveling. The camera pulls back across the tangled bed sheets, showing a man whose ego has shattered under the crushing weight of his own twisted devotion. Lying beside her, his fingers trace frantic circles against her skin, a desperate anchor to soothe his raging paranoia. He actually begs her to find another way, a shocking break from his ruthless nature. Yet Elena remains terrifyingly calm. She mirrors his gentle touch, her voice perfectly steady, as she swears this nightmare is their only escape. She genuinely believes in this mission, tragically mistaking this plunge into darkness for true control over her destiny. The most dangerous cages in life are always the ones we willingly lock from the inside. Picture this cinematic scene. We open on a classic underworld setup, but we have to look closer. That midnight confession Alessandro made was never romance. It was a calculated anchor meant to keep her chained down when the violence finally starts. Their shared insomnia is just mutual trauma pretending to be intimacy. Now, watch her at this isolated cafe. Elena arrives early, her eyes scanning the perimeter. Her heart is hammering against her ribs, but she orders her coffee with the dead calm of someone buying groceries, a complete shutdown of human emotion. Meanwhile, her husband's security team wraps around her like a suffocating shroud as he waits just blocks away. We must always remember that control wearing the mask of love is still just an iron grip. Watch Julia walk right into the trap, looking like a frightened deer catching the scent of a wolf. Pay attention to the deep tension in her stiff shoulders and the way her eyes dart toward every passing shadow. You are witnessing a lifetime of surviving an unpredictable family. As she sits across from Elena, two deeply broken women finally collide. Elena plays this beautifully, gently offering a chair to deliberately lower the tension. But Julia immediately brings up her brother Luca and his explosive temper. Her entire existence is filtered through his rage. Elena spins this masterfully, proposing they actually want the exact same piece, dismantling Julia's heavy walls brick by brick. When you spend your life bracing for a punch, an outstretched hand feels like a miracle. Elena strikes the emotional nerves so perfectly that it is genuinely painful to watch. She whispers the one terrifying truth Julia cannot say out loud. The very second their father dies, Luca is going to completely lose his mind. Watch the slight tremble in Julia's jaw. That tiny flicker of hope proves Elena has slipped past her heavy armor. Julia tries to play it off, acting as if her brother is an unstoppable force of nature. But then comes the stinging reality. Elena levels the playing field, admitting quietly that her own husband is a monster too. She takes their shared curse of loving violent men and transforms it into a solid bridge between them. It leaves us with a bitter lesson. Sometimes our deepest, ugliest scars are the exact things that bond us to our worst enemies. Let's look at this next move together, because it is a masterstroke of tragic manipulation. Elena shatters the mobster fantasy, openly admitting her husband is a killer. Then she dangles the irresistible bait. She paints a picture where Luca could actually be saved, casting Julia as his sole savior. It is the perfect trap for anyone drowning in a toxic bond. She whispers that Julia has the power to fix him. Yet when Elena suggests a peaceful meeting without guns, Julia physically recoils in her chair. She cannot imagine her brother existing outside of a war zone. The thought of people talking without blood spilling is entirely alien. It is a harsh truth we all face. You can never force peace onto a soul whose entire identity relies on constant warfare. Focus closely on Elena's hands. She reaches across the table, but stops inches short of touching Julia. It is a brilliant display of giving a terrified person space while projecting warmth. She hands Julia the pure illusion of control. The agonizing silence is the sound of Julia's brain processing a new reality. They strike an agreement. Two women caged by the massive egos of violent men finding a fragile sliver of trust. But the absolute second Julia walks away, the warmth drains from Elena's eyes. She reverts to a cold operative, casually signaling the extraction team. The lesson here is bitter. When you are locked in survival mode, even your genuine empathy becomes just another weapon to stay alive. The ambush drops on Elena with such suffocating speed that her mind simply misfires, leaving her trapped before she even realizes the cage is locked. Then the nightmare peels away from the shadows. Luca steps into the light, wearing the hollow smirk of a predator who knows he has already won. He breathes in her panic, casually revealing that her husband's men were lured away by a phantom target in mere seconds. He strips away every layer of her psychological armor, leaving her exposed to the cold shock of absolute isolation. It is a sobering reminder for every single one of us. We love to believe we are the untouchable authors of our own destiny, but sometimes our most careful and brilliant plans are simply the blueprints for our own undoing. What exactly drives a man like Luca to such extremes? It is a blind obsession bound to drown everyone in collateral damage. He does not just want to defeat Alessandro physically, he wants to break his mind. By taking Elena, Luca weaponizes their twisted romance, knowing Alessandro's ego will blind his tactical judgment. Watch the camera linger on Elena as rough hands drag her away. She fights the rising tide of panic, her eyes darting for an exit that does not exist. Luca has jammed the signals and plunged the block into pitch darkness. This forces a chilling truth upon us. Strip away the protective comforts of our modern routines, and we quickly realize we are all just fragile creatures relying on raw instinct to survive. This is the exact moment the tension snaps. Staring into the dark van, Elena's primal brain takes over. She waits for one breathless distraction and lashes out with a hidden blade, moving with terrifying speed. You and I can actually see the sudden panic flash in Luca's eyes as he screams at his men to keep her alive, frantic to protect his leverage. Elena bolts. Burning adrenaline pushes her through the shadows until she slams hard into a dead end, backed against a cold brick wall, her chest heaving. She raises that blood-stained knife in a beautifully heartbreaking final stand. It teaches us a brutal but necessary lesson. Never underestimate a person who has absolutely nothing left to lose. When all hope is gone, that is the exact moment we become truly dangerous. The most chilling detail about Luca in this sequence is the sheer boredom on his face. He watches Elena fight for her life and simply analyzes her, like a cold scientist observing a rat in a doomed maze. He fully intends to use her broken spirit to push Alessandro into a fatal mistake. Eventually, the numbers game catches up. His men pin her arms and rip the knife away. She releases a raw, defiant scream, refusing to surrender. Just when it seems like every ounce of hope is buried, the deafening roar of a gunshot echoes down the alley, freezing every man in place. It is a stark reminder that life favors the unexpected twist. No matter how perfectly you believe you have cornered your prey, there is always a darker, hungrier monster waiting just outside the edge of the light. Enter Alessandro, stepping from the shadows like a reaper, collecting a heavy debt. His endless paranoia has finally paid off as his men flood the alleyway. But the most terrifying detail? Alessandro is practically whispering. He carries the quiet calm of a man who has already decided that every soul in front of him will die. Luca's smug confidence instantly crumbles. He grabs Elena, threatening her life in a pathetic grasp at fading power. Alessandro does not blink. He simply refuses to negotiate. Let this be a profound lesson about fear. True terror is infectious. Watching Luca's hands tremble against Elena's neck proves that even the worst monsters recognize when they are standing in the presence of an apex predator. Let the camera down to the cold concrete. You and I are watching the ultimate power shift, a modern tragedy playing out under harsh lights. Luca is scrambling backward, his voice cracking as he begs for his life, bargaining with a wall of ice. Now, look closely at Alessandro. The shadows fall heavily across his face, but there is zero anger in his eyes. There is only a terrifying, empty void, the sheer blankness of a man entirely disconnected from empathy. In a sudden blur of motion, the frame violently tilts. Luca hits the floor, choking under the heavy leather of Alessandro's boot, a cold gun barrel pressed right between his eyes. The brutal truth of this world becomes undeniably clear. We must learn that you can never negotiate with a storm that only knows how to destroy. Notice how the light drains from the scene the moment Elena is released. She crumples against the freezing brick wall, her body trembling as the survival adrenaline abandons her system. The camera deliberately lingers on her feet. Just inches away lies Luca, his life extinguished by a single bullet. And there stands Alessandro, chest barely rising. The fresh blood on his knuckles is treated like a minor inconvenience. The lens pushes in tight on Elena's face, capturing the exact, devastating second her reality fractures. The gentle lover who whispered in the dark has been replaced by a chilling stranger. It leaves us with a quiet, shattering lesson about blind trust. The most painful betrayal in life is the discovering that the very person who promised to shield you from harm is actually the real monster. The audio drops out, leaving only the hollow ringing of a shattered illusion. When Alessandro speaks, his hesitant voice is the cold static of a broken radio. He is not even looking at her. His eyes are fixed on the middle distance, calculating the grim arithmetic of wiping Luca's bloodline from the earth. As guards pull Elena into the shadows, she turns her head. The frame holds on her tear-streaked face as she watches the man she worships willingly wade back into an ocean of blood. You and I have seen this tragic flaw before. We dress up our personal demons in tailored suits and ignore every glaring warning sign. We arrogantly believe our devotion is strong enough to cure a poisoned soul, but we must accept a hard truth. No amount of affection can ever rewrite a destructive nature. Let us hold the frame right here on the bedroom doorway. The gentle morning light, bleeding through the curtains, betrays the suffocating weight of the air inside. Elena has been pacing all night, a pale ghost haunting her own gilded cage. The heavy oak door swings open. Alessandro stands there, painted in the dark blood of his rivals, offering up a brutal mass execution as a twisted declaration of devotion. But pay close attention to his posture. The apex predator freezes on the threshold. His broad shoulders slump, paralyzed by the realization that his violence might have broken the only fragile thing he truly treasures. It is a miserable irony of relationships that we all must learn. Sometimes, the tighter we furiously squeeze someone in an effort to protect them, the faster we shatter them. The camera pushes in slowly, refusing to blink at the madness of this exchange. Elena does not scream. Her voice is eerily hollow as she calmly asks for the body count, weighing human lives like simple, accounting. Alessandro drops his head, offering a single word enough. This is the exact frame where Elena quietly trades away her soul. The metallic scent of blood hangs in the room, yet she commands him to step forward. The ruthless kingpin shuffles toward her like a beaten dog, begging forgiveness, merely for staining her eyes with his mess. Then comes the line that seals her tragic fate. She whispers that he must never apologize for his true nature. The descent into darkness is rarely a sudden fall. It is a slow, willing surrender built on the endless excuses we make for the people we blindly love. We need to be honest with ourselves, because dressing this up as romance is a terrifying delusion. The lighting tries to paint a dark fairy tale, but we are looking directly at the rotting core of a severe trauma bond. The human mind is a brilliant master of survival. It effortlessly convinces Elena that the architect of her terror is actually her sanctuary. Alessandro's knees give out. He collapses against her chest, a trembling mountain of muscle, sobbing over the thought of losing his prized possession. Delicately, her trembling fingers stroke his hair. She is actively comforting her own executioner. It is perhaps the most heartbreaking paradox of the human condition. We assume pain always sends us running for the safety of the light, but sometimes it violently anchors us to the dark. Focus closely on her hands. The visual contrast is sickening. Her soft fingers trace the tense, blood-spattered shoulders of a mass murderer. Every survival instinct she possesses has flatlined. She breathes into his neck, whispering her confusion about why her terror has vanished. Her justification is a tragic surrender. I am yours, and you are mine. Make no mistake, this is no longer affection. It is a shared, fatal disease. He pulls her in, blending the metallic taste of slaughter with obsessive worship. For one fleeting frame, his eyes hold the sorrow of knowing he will inevitably ruin her. Yet, she pulls him closer anyway. It brings us to a terrifying realization. The most inescapable prison on this earth is never made of cold iron bars. It is built entirely within a willing human heart. The harsh morning sun washes over the marble floors of the estate, illuminating a deeply disturbing reality. Downstairs, housemaids silently scrub away the crimson stains, but no amount of bleach can wash the rot setting into their souls. Watch Alessandro carefully as the months slip by and his empire stabilizes. His next move is pure, calculated manipulation. He stops hiding his darkness. Instead, he pulls Elena directly into the shadows, laying out the ledgers, the bribes, and the blood money right on their dining table. He weaves her into the very fabric of his crimes, making sure her hands will never be clean again. It teaches us a hard truth about complicity. If you willingly sit down to feast on the spoils of the dark, you forever share the guilt of the butcher. Stick with me here, because her psychological decay is utterly agonizing to watch. The innocent girl from the coastal bakery is now coldly reviewing shipping routes for a criminal syndicate. The lieutenants actually believe her presence tamed the beast, blind to the fact she simply learned to feed his madness. When her sister Valentina visits, the camera catches the hollow curve of Elena's smile over porcelain teacups. Valentina leaves the compound relieved, convinced her sister found a happy ending, completely misreading the dead, glassy look in her eyes. It forces us to recognize an unbearable reality about human suffering. Sometimes, what the world interprets as quiet serenity is simply the tragic silence of a soul that has entirely forgotten how to scream. The true horror of this descent is that if you asked Elena today, she would look right through the lens and swear she was happy. To build that illusion, she had to bury her own conscience in a shallow grave. Cut to exactly 1 year later, the camera sweeps over the breathtaking Amalfi Cliffs, bathing the couple in golden hour light. Alessandro holds her hand on the balcony, his thumb tracing the heavy gold of her wedding band, a beautiful permanent tether. From the outside, it is a picture of absolute perfection, but the wind carrying the sea salt cannot wash away the rigid tension in her shoulders. The lesson here is quiet but heavy. True harmony is never found in the brief pauses between storms. When a human spirit is deeply fractured, it simply settles for the quiet. Watch what happens when the ultimate catalyst drops into this beautiful nightmare. The entire composition shatters. When Elena softly confesses she is 12 weeks pregnant, the ruthless mastermind completely vanishes from his eyes. The camera circles them as pure panic takes over his rigid posture. He reaches for her as if she is crafted from the thinnest, most fragile glass, suddenly terrified of the violence lingering in his own palms. And then the untouchable king of the underworld begins to weep. Heavy tears stream down his face, mourning the innocent life he never believed he deserved. We know perfectly well that a few tears can never wash away a mountain of corpses. Yet, it reminds us of a simple human truth. Even the most broken among us secretly pray for a gentle hand in the dark. Notice how the lighting shifts here, casting a warm, deceptive glow over his face as he actively rewrites his own dark mythology. He spent his life convinced that warmth and family were luxuries denied to creatures of his design. But Elena, anchored deep in their shared trauma, fiercely vows that he is worthy of this miracle. The laugh breaking from his chest is raw, tearing through decades of suffocating guilt. He presses his scarred hand against her stomach, and in a heartbeat, the lethal predator returns to his eyes. He quietly swears to build an iron fortress around this child, promising to shield it from the very rot that flows in his own veins. It reveals the ultimate tragedy of the wicked. You can never build a true, lasting sanctuary on top of a restless graveyard. The camera pushes into the shadowed nursery, forcing us to look closely at this quiet moment. Alessandro grips the crib, swearing his child will never know the freezing dilation that forged him into a killer. Elena watches the darkness cling to him, understanding his tragic paradox, a shattered predator capable of fierce devotion. He turns and actually thanks her for staying in the pitch black with him. That is the ultimate victory for a narcissist. They find a saint willing to drink their venom and call it wine. They name the newborn Sophia, a desperate plea to wash the blood from their violent family tree. But here is the raw truth we must always remember. You can never outrun the heavy ghosts of your past simply by giving them a beautiful new name. Cut directly to the glaring fluorescent lights of the delivery ward. The most ruthless kingpin in the city is suddenly reduced to a weeping, trembling mess. Cradling this fragile newborn, sheer panic floods his veins. He is terrified his rotting soul will somehow seep into her pure skin. It is a naked, crushing moment of truth. Yet Elena reaches out, forever his enabler, pulling him back from the ledge. She strokes his face, insisting his obsessive love will magically erase his violent sins. She looks at Wild Tiger and truly believes it can become a tame pet if it is loved enough. But life offers us a much heavier lesson. We can never completely wash away our own shadows. The best we can hope for is to teach our children how to walk through the dark without letting it swallow them. Look closely at the framing in the maternity ward. Alessandro delivers a masterclass in devotion, eyes shimmering with tears, but an observer must look right past the performance. To a mob boss, this baby is the ultimate emotional asset. He hovers relentlessly at Elena's shoulder, adjusting every pillow, dictating every breath. To the nurses, he is Father of the Year. To a trained eye, it is suffocating dominance. Elena, drowning in her delusion, watches his obsessive micromanagement and actually feels entirely safe. As the pale sunrise hits the hospital floor, the steel trap snaps shut forever. The lesson here is deeply tragic. A cage will always feel like a protective fortress once you forget what true freedom tastes like. Their bond is no longer just a game. It is locked in blood. He kisses her forehead, whispering they built something beautiful. Watch the tragic distortion in Elena's eyes. She looks at a vicious mob boss and believes her touch transformed a ravenous wolf into a devoted shepherd. It is the delusion of a captive heart. The camera cuts forward a few years, landing on Sofia, now a fiercely stubborn child. The shift in Alessandro is deeply cinematic. The cold tyrant who orders executions with a mere nod melts the seconds his little girl demands a plastic cup of imaginary tea. His suffocating ego never vanished. He simply transferred his God complex onto his daughter. The bitter lesson of human nature is inescapable here. A dangerous man never truly sheds his dark soul. He merely finds a beautiful, innocent reason to justify keeping his claws razor sharp. Let's freeze the frame right here. You and I need to examine Alessandro playing the perfect family man. He steps back from the bloody alleys, letting his soldiers handle the brutal executions. The camera lingers on Elena, softly touching the dark ink scarred into his neck, the literal barcode of a predator. She convinces herself he has been entirely purified by the grace of fatherhood. It is a breathtakingly tragic scene. She desperately believes he finally understands that power means nothing without love. But the monstrous beast inside his chest never died. It merely learned how to hunt quietly in the dark, so it would not wake the baby down the hall. We must always remember this vital lesson. Just because a monster stops biting you, it does not mean the beast has been magically tamed. The timeline leaps to their 5th anniversary, revealing how a master manipulator buries his tracks. Elena never grew immune to the dread. She just locked it away to survive. Alessandro brings her back to Florence, leading her into the exact room where she once hid from him in trembling terror. The lighting is warm as he delivers a poetic speech about almost losing his soulmate. Do not let the swelling music deceive you. He is surgically erasing her final sanctuary of independence. He takes the geography of her trauma and repaints it with roses. The heartbreak is watching her mistake a heavy padlock for a promise ring. The lesson is brutally clear. When someone deliberately rewrites your darkest memories with romance, they are not healing your wounds. They are simply reinforcing the invisible walls of your beautiful prison. The camera drifts through the shadows as he leans close, his voice dropping to a low whisper. He wants to reclaim these streets, erasing the sanctuary she built without him. Notice the subtle tightening of his jaw, the mark of a man who cannot endure a world he does not own. The truest tragedy unfolds when the warm light catches her trembling smile. She walks the exact cobblestones she once bled on in sheer panic, and somehow she actually feels safe. We must remember that comfort is a deeply dangerous illusion when someone else holds the key to your cage. Valentina arrives next, radiating chaotic, untamed energy. The kingpin shifts his weight, his eyes darkening with unspoken dread. He fears her wild independence for one simple reason. True freedom is the one human force a tyrant can never hope to break. Let us take a closer look at this sequence, because it plays out like a masterful, quiet horror film right in front of us. Valentina laughs off the heavy tension, joking that she represents the ordinary life he left behind, framing his decision to spare them as some grand moral victory. But watch the lighting shift. Deep shadows swallow the frame as Alessandro slips his hand under the linen tablecloth, his fingers locking over Elena's wrist. It is a quiet, devastating leash. Later, under the silver moonlight of a Florence terrace, he opens a velvet box to reveal a diamond on a thick platinum chain. The simple, meaningful life lesson here is to never confuse a prison for a prize. In this gilded underworld, that blinding piece of jewelry is nothing but a beautifully forged collar. A soft gasp escapes her lips as the diamond catches the terrace light. The camera pushes in on his hardened face as he weaponizes his pain, whispering that this is the only relic saved from his mother before his father ruined their family. The emotional gravity hits her like a blow. Fastening the cold metal around her neck, he declares her his legacy. He does not see an equal standing before him. He sees conquered territory. Tears fill her eyes as she offers her fragile devotion, and his reply is a hollow nod. He demands absolute worship. In that freezing breath, she buries the memory of his past cruelty. We must learn a vital life lesson from this interaction. A deeply tragic backstory never excuses the actions of a present-day monster. Stick with me here, because watching a captive invent meaning for her suffering is deeply unsettling. She stares into his dark eyes and swears she has no regrets, convincing her shattered mind that trauma was the fire required to forge their souls. The score swells as they share a cinematic kiss above the glittering city, sealing the toxic illusion. The screen fades into a montage of passing decades. Their faces age, the lighting turning muted and grey. They label their vicious cycle of conflict as passion, but it is just a haunting echo of their original wounds. The overarching life lesson is clear. True love is meant to heal, while obsession only bleeds. And their gravest sin is raising children, blindly handing this broken nightmare down to innocent hands. The dark empire shifts to their son, washing decades of spilled blood into a sterile corporate facade. The deafening gunfire fades, yet the suffocating weight of their power never leaves the frame. One quiet evening, the camera lingers on the old kingpin, tracing his faded tattoos and confessing his disbelief at finding peace. Elena curls against his chest, her posture a tragic portrait of total submission. Let this stand as a profound, meaningful lesson for us all. We can never confuse the surrender of human agency with the presence of genuine affection. He kisses her wrinkled forehead, whispering his deep gratitude. But we must be ruthlessly honest about this quiet moment. He is not honoring the purity of her soul. He is merely celebrating 40 years of unbroken obedience. When she softly asks what he is so thankful for, he admits her presence finally gave him a reason to live. The sheer arrogance of his words hangs heavy in the room. Her entire existence is validated solely because it anchored a monster. Yet she smiles, praising his bravery, treating a captor's basic decency as a monumental triumph. Golden sunlight bleeds through the windows, framing a stunning visual portrait of romance. The director desperately wants us to cheer for two damaged souls who beat the odds. But the most meaningful life lesson here lies in what the camera deliberately tries to hide. You and I must sit in the dark and remember the bitter truth of the opening scene. On day one, she was running blindly through the cold streets, consumed by absolute, mind-shattering terror. The camera lingers on the quiet devastation of the final shot. We are told he waded through hellfire, changing his soul to be worthy of her. They frame it as a romance that conquered every shadow. But look closer at the possessive grip of his hand. Romanticizing coercive control is a tragic mistake. As the screen fades to black, the bitter truth settles in. This was never a healthy love. It was an unbreakable loop of shared sickness. The ruthless kingpin found his perfect mirror, while the runaway mistook the iron bars of her cage for a warm embrace. They stayed together for decades because a trauma bond is just a prison disguised as home. The simplest, most vital lesson in this tragedy is profound. Real love sets you free. It never locks you away in the dark. Alessandro's apology is meaningful only because he eventually supports it with action. At first, his words are not enough. He tells Elena he loves her, explains the past, and promises that she matters more than Valentina. But Elena understands that trust cannot be rebuilt through emotional declarations alone. She needs time, space, honesty, and proof. This is one of the most educational parts of the story. Many people believe that saying "I am sorry" should immediately repair damage. But when trust has been broken, an apology is only the beginning. Accountability means accepting the pain one has caused without demanding instant forgiveness. Alessandro begins to show accountability when he respects Elena's boundaries, gives her space, stops monitoring her without permission, and later allows her to participate in decisions involving her own safety. He also faces Valentina and tells the truth about the past, even though it is uncomfortable and humiliating. These actions matter because they show growth. Elena, in turn, does not pretend the wound has vanished. She admits that doubt may remain, that the hurt may never fully disappear, and that their future must be built differently from their past. This is a mature lesson about reconciliation. Love can be repaired, but only when the person who caused harm is willing to change behavior, not just express regret. The injured person also has the right to move slowly. Forgiveness should never be forced, rushed, or treated as a debt owed to the person who apologized. The story teaches that real healing is a process. It requires truth, patience, humility, and repeated evidence of change. Alessandro earns another chance not because he is powerful, but because he learns to become honest, vulnerable, and respectful of Elena's choices.